There is a financial pattern that has been quietly preserved within certain families for more than 3,000 years, built around the number 7. When you hear it, you begin to understand why some lineages manage to sustain and grow wealth across generations, while others work endlessly and still end up with very little. Even large financial institutions are aware of recurring patterns like this, but they rarely explain them in simple terms to everyday people. Let me be honest with you. Have you ever checked your bank balance at the end of the month and felt like your money simply vanished? You work hard, stay consistent, sacrifice your time and energy, yet there is always more month left than money. The truth is not that you are careless, but that you were never taught the deeper rules that govern how money actually moves, grows, and disappears. Diane worked 2 jobs for nearly 15 years, spending her days as a nurse and her nights cleaning offices just to stay afloat. She was responsible and never careless with money. Yet every time she saved a little, life took it back quickly. A broken car, medical bill, or home repair erased her progress. It felt like money never stayed long enough to build stability. Meanwhile, she watched other families who didn't work harder steadily buy homes, invest in their children, and create security. That contrast raised a question most people never ask. What do they understand that I don't? Many blame luck or privilege, but that answer is incomplete. Beneath it are deeper patterns about money and cycles preserved in Jewish tradition for thousands of years, forming the foundation of what I call the 777 rule. What most people don't realize is that traditions like this are not superstition or mythology. They are systems of observation, refined over centuries, carried through families that survived empires, exile, persecution, and repeated economic collapse. In Jewish teaching, especially within the Torah and discussions in the Talmud, there is a strong emphasis on cycles, timing, and discipline when it comes to resources. Wealth is not viewed as something random or purely based on effort alone, but something that follows structured patterns across time. These principles were never meant as shortcuts or magic formulas. They are practical frameworks for understanding how money is earned, preserved, and transferred across generations. The number 7 appears repeatedly as a marker of cycles, rest, and renewal, showing that financial behavior also moves in patterns rather than straight lines. This is where the 777 rule comes in. It is a way of understanding how these ancient patterns of timing and behavior can be applied to modern financial life. It is not about superstition or prediction, but about discipline, awareness, and consistency. When you begin to recognize these cycles, you start to see money differently and make decisions with more structure instead of emotion. In the next part, I will break down each of the 3 sevens, where they come from, and how they connect directly to your financial habits today. More importantly, I will show you how to start applying them immediately, not in some distant future, but starting this week. Because real change begins when you take what has been hidden in plain sight for centuries and finally use it with intention and clarity in your own life. The first 7 is connected to the rhythm of work and rest, and the best way to understand it is through a story from my family. My grandmother arrived in this country with almost nothing, just 2 suitcases and a small amount of money hidden inside her coat. She didn't speak the language, had no education to rely on, no network, and no business background. Yet over time, she built something stable. First, a small shop, then ownership of the building itself, and eventually enough assets to support the next generation. When I was young, I asked her how she managed to turn nothing into something lasting. Her answer surprised me. She didn't talk about effort or hustle. Instead, she said the real key was knowing when to pause. At the time, I didn't fully grasp what she meant, but I never forgot it. That idea connects deeply with a principle found in the book of Exodus, where there is a command to work for 6 days and then set aside the seventh as a day of rest. Many people see this as purely spiritual, but my grandmother viewed it as something practical as well. Her understanding was that constant labor without interruption affects judgment. When people never stop, their thinking becomes clouded, decisions become reactive, and they often accept poor opportunities simply because they are exhausted. Rest, in her view, wasn't laziness, it was a reset that protected clarity. There is also a traditional teaching found in Talmudic thought that suggests provision is structured in cycles, with what is set aside for rest existing outside of normal loss calculations. In simple terms, intentional rest does not reduce stability, it helps preserve it. She practiced this in a very disciplined way. Every week, she would close her shop 1 full day, even when others stayed open, and mocked the decision as lost income. But over time, that habit gave her an advantage they didn't see. While others were constantly running, she returned to work with a clearer mind, better judgment, and sharper awareness of opportunities. That pause allowed her to make more stable, long-term decisions instead of short-term, emotional ones. The core idea of the first 7 is simple. Structure your life in a cycle of 6 focused days of effort, followed by 1 full day of intentional rest. Not idle distraction, but rest that restores thinking and direction. Without that rhythm, effort becomes exhaustion, and effort without clarity rarely builds lasting wealth. The second 7 takes this idea of cycles even further and comes from what is known in Torah tradition as the Shemitah cycle. In the book of Deuteronomy, there is a principle that every 7 years a form of release takes place, where debts are forgiven and financial obligations are reset. This idea of a structured reset challenges how most modern financial systems operate today. In contemporary life, debt is often designed to extend over long periods, with people remaining tied to repayment structures for many years. The ancient principle, however, is built on the idea that systems should not trap people indefinitely, but instead reset periodically to prevent permanent financial collapse. It reflects a cycle where accumulation and release are both part of the same structure, not just endless repayment without pause. They've made it feel like carrying debt forever is just part of normal life, something you're supposed to accept without question. But in Jewish tradition, debt was never designed to be permanent. It was meant to move in cycles, not stretch endlessly across a lifetime. There was a man in our community, I'll call him David, who once came to speak at our synagogue about 15 years ago. He had done everything right by conventional standards, successful in real estate, multiple properties, strong income, respected by others. Then 2008 hit, and everything collapsed around him. By the time it was over, he was sitting with more than $2 million in debt, spread across several properties. And his life felt like it was falling apart in every direction. David later described a moment that stayed with him. One morning, he was sitting in his car outside his office, unable to bring himself to walk in. He said it felt like his entire system had shut down. No clarity, no direction, just pressure from every side. That same evening, he went to speak with his rabbi, expecting advice about strategy or survival. Instead, he was told something completely different. The rabbi said, "David, you are in your personal Shemitah year. This is not punishment, it is release." Then he explained that the idea of Shemitah is not only about literal debt forgiveness in ancient law, but about regularly stepping back to reset your entire financial structure and clear what is no longer serving you. What David began to understand was that financial life accumulates weight over time. Obligations, deals, habits, and commitments that once made sense but slowly turn into pressure. These can include investments that are draining rather than growing, partnerships held together by pride instead of value, subscriptions you forgot you were paying for, or long-term decisions you continue only because stopping feels uncomfortable. The Shemitah principle forces a different kind of honesty. Every 7 years, you review everything and ask whether it still deserves space in your life. Not emotionally, but practically. Does it build you, or does it quietly weaken you? David went home that night and started that process. He wrote down every obligation he had, every debt, every agreement, every recurring cost, and went through them one by one with a simple question. If I were starting over today, would I choose this again? Anything that no longer made sense was removed, even when it felt difficult. He sold properties that were draining him, ended a partnership that had been quietly holding him back, and cut expenses he had been maintaining out of habit rather than purpose. It didn't fix everything overnight, but over time his financial pressure began to lift. His income initially decreased, but so did his losses, and for the first time in years he wasn't constantly slipping backward. Within a few years, David rebuilt his entire financial foundation, but this time without the burden of unnecessary debt. The key shift wasn't just financial, it was psychological. He stopped carrying things that no longer belonged in his life. That is the core of the second 7. Every 7 years, you conduct a full reset of your financial structure, not by panic, but by deliberate release. This week, the practical step is simple. Write down every financial obligation you currently have, debts, subscriptions, recurring payments, everything. Then go through each one and ask a clear question. If I were starting fresh today, would I choose this again? The goal is not comfort. The goal is clarity. Now the third 7 is where everything shifts again, because it is not about letting go, it is about how money moves forward. It connects to an ancient principle often associated with tithing, found throughout early biblical tradition, including the story of Jacob in Genesis. After his dream of the ladder reaching heaven, Jacob made a vow in a moment where he had nothing, no home, no stability, no security. Lying on the ground with a stone for a pillow, he committed that if he were ever provided for, he would give a portion back. That idea later evolved into structured giving systems across ancient Israel, where a portion of income was set aside for support of community, including the poor and vulnerable, especially during cycles of release like Shemitah. What most people miss is not the concept of giving, but the timing and priority of it. In this framework, giving was never meant to be what remains after expenses, it was meant to come first. That order matters because it changes the mindset entirely. Giving becomes a declaration of trust, not a leftover action. There was a woman named Ruth in our community, a widow living on a modest pension. People often assumed she was struggling, and in some ways she was. Yet every month she still set aside a small portion for giving. Not large amounts, sometimes very small, but she never skipped it. People would tell her she couldn't afford to give, but she would respond that she couldn't afford not to, because it kept her anchored in trust and discipline rather than fear. Over time, Ruth lived a stable, steady life. She never faced extreme lack, and what little she had was managed with care and consistency. The deeper idea reflected in traditional teachings is that structured giving is not about loss, it is about alignment. It places money into motion rather than stagnation. The third 7, in practical terms, is about setting aside a consistent portion of your income before anything else, not as emotional charity, but as structured discipline that keeps your financial behavior grounded and intentional. Start with a manageable percentage, apply it consistently, and observe how your relationship with money begins to change over time through structure, not impulse. Now let's pull all 3 of these together, because once you see how they connect, the entire idea starts to form one clear rhythm instead of separate concepts. The first 7 is about rest, stepping back every 7th day so your mind doesn't get consumed by constant pressure. When you rest intentionally, your thinking becomes sharper, your judgment steadies, and your work stops turning into exhaustion-driven motion. Instead of reacting to life, you start navigating it with clarity. That pause is not a break from progress. It is what protects progress from becoming chaos. The second 7 is about release. Every 7 cycles, whether that is months or years, you step back and evaluate everything you are carrying. Not just money, but obligations, commitments, and decisions that may have made sense once, but no longer serve your direction. You let go of what is draining you, so you don't enter your next season weighed down by things that no longer belong in it. This is where clarity is restored, because growth cannot continue in a space that is overcrowded with outdated burdens. The third 7 is about giving. You set aside 7% of what you receive before anything else, not as an afterthought, but as the first movement of your financial flow. It establishes discipline, structure, and a sense of trust in how resources move through your life. Rest, release, and give. 3 movements that form a cycle rather than a one-time action. When you combine them, you are no longer just managing money. You are working with rhythm instead of resistance. This pattern reflects something much older than modern financial systems. In creation itself, there is a rhythm of work and rest. 6 days of building, 1 day of pause. 6 years of cultivation, 1 year of release. The idea is not random, it is structured flow. Life, work, land, and even resources function better when they are not forced into constant tension. When everything is held too tightly, it loses movement. But when there is space for rest, release, and circulation, stability becomes sustainable rather than fragile. Over time, I have seen people who live by this rhythm develop a very different kind of stability. Their finances are not just about accumulation, they are about balance. Their decisions are not driven by panic, they are guided by clarity. And their relationships, health, and sense of direction often reflect the same structure. What begins as financial discipline slowly becomes a broader way of living, where pressure is replaced with order, and reaction is replaced with intention. That is what generational stability really is. It is not only about what you build, but how you think while building it, and what you pass on as understanding. Because money alone does not sustain families, patterns do. And when those patterns are rooted in rest, release, and disciplined giving, they tend to carry forward in ways that outlast circumstances. Right now, the idea is simple. You are either living inside a reactive cycle, or you are choosing a structured one. And shifting that does not start with something overwhelming, it starts with awareness of a different rhythm. Rest so you can think clearly. Release so you can move freely. Give so your flow stays open. If this resonates with you, the real step is not just understanding it, but applying it in small, consistent ways. Because change does not come from intensity, it comes from repetition, aligned with structure.